Hey again, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking of Sundara, where I talk about Sundara, Dawn of a New Age, my fantasy RPG setting. We're approaching the end of 2025, and 2026 will be starting fairly soon, and I haven't done as much this past year with the setting as I originally set out to. While it is true I did finish Phase 4, which for folks who haven't seen it was the Whispers and Rumors series of supplements that went along with the cities that originally built the setting. We still have one more coming out, by the way, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But with that done, I figured it was probably time to get back to it, to figure out some way to try and reinvigorate Sundara, to go in a new direction, or to revisit some of the things I'd done previously that seemed very popular. And since there's at least two folks who are contributing to the setting right now who are also helping me build it out and add flesh to the bones, I wanted to take a minute to sort of remind myself and to talk to you all out in the audience about the things that I really liked about this setting and the things that I should probably explore more and do more with. So to that end, I wanted to throw together a quick list, and if you are not someone who has read anything for Sundara, you've not played in the setting, and any of these sound really interesting to you, I'd recommend picking up some of the books, giving them a read, because I have had a lot of fun putting stuff together for it, and I think at this point, if my math is correct, I've done over 250,000 words for the setting, so no point in stopping now if the Rolling Stone still has some hill to go down. But beginning at the beginning, and I've said this before in various interviews about the topic. I talked about it a little while ago in another episode of this when Isaiah Burt sat down and talked with me, but it's that Sundara is really weird. And I know in its way, every fantasy setting is kind of weird. It's fantasy. It's meant to be unique and strange and unusual. But I think a lot of the time we fall into the same tropes and the same rules that have been with us since the first editions of Dungeons & Dragons, and which were really codified by, writers like Vance, like Tolkien, that there are just certain things that happen in these fantasy settings, and that's the way it is. And I wanted to shake that up a lot, particularly for folks who saw me talk about Horde Reach City of Worms, which I will mention again here in a bit for another reason. I really wanted players and game masters to have that opportunity to pull out whatever wild, random, wacky idea they had, and there's a reason that exists in this setting. It's a completely justified in-lore reason that wasn't just there because somebody wanted to do something silly. I wanted to take some of those shackles off, and I wanted to give people the opportunity to do more, to do things that in other games they would get side-eyed for, or that would be considered too weird, too strange, too unusual, too special. Sundara is made up of those, whether it's high concept, or whether it just goes against the normal grain, everything here is, it's the phrase of everything is true, nothing is permitted, or vice versa. I think it's the other way around, actually. Anyway, yeah, the idea was if you wanted to play a monstrous character who happened to be not evil in a way that people don't expect, you can do that here without so much as straining yourself. It's not a problem. If you wanted to play a gunslinger with an air rifle, if you wanted to be someone who once fought a dragon on as a crew of an airship, you can do that. It's all in the lore. None of that even stretches. Game Master has to do no heavy lifting. That's just stuff you can have in your backstory, no problem. And I wanted to keep adding to that with new projects in the new year. I wanted to expand just how ridiculous things can get without stopping being serious. It's that thing of part of what makes fantasy really enjoyable is we can do the most out there storylines, and we can do it completely po-faced. And that is a thing I wanted to really lean into because that's part of what I find really fun in world building and in gaming. As for a second thing that I'm pretty proud of, that I really enjoyed, and that I will definitely be returning to, is what I did with dragons. Now, it's not groundbreaking reimagining of one of the oldest mythological creatures known to humanity, but dragons had sort of fallen into this routine, particularly with how they were reimagined in 3.5 for Dungeons & Dragons. There was, the metallic dragons, and there were the chromatic dragons. There was the good and there was the evil, which between Bahamut and Tiamat and all of the dragon politics and the dragon mythology that went into it, they kind of got codified in certain ways. There was just expectations as to how dragons should be and what they should do. And I wanted to shake that up. And part of what led to this is when I started designing Sundara, everyone told me we want a fantasy setting, whether it's Pathfinder, whether it's Dungeons and Dragons, whether it's something similar to that but a different game. We want no alignment. And so that was the first thing I did, was I threw alignment out the window. And because of that, it changed the way a lot of creatures work, and it changed the way a lot of, well, at least some classes work. But because of that, it gave me the opportunity to reimagine dragons in a completely new and different fashion. And one of those was boiling them all the way back down to basics of there are just different colored dragons with different breath weapons. But beyond that, the best way to think of it is a dragon's color and its element is kind of like a zodiac sign of there's rumors and beliefs that certain dragons have certain personalities, but they're completely open to interpretation. Dragons, much like player characters, can be whatever and whoever they want. They may be born a certain way, they may have certain inherent characteristics. You know, a red dragon is going to have a fire breath weapon, and it's going to feel comfortable in areas of extreme heat. But beyond that, as far as their personality, things they enjoy, causes they believe in, and to a certain extent places they live, all of that is up to the creature. It is able to be who it wants and to change itself in whatever ways that it wants. And I feel that made the creatures a lot more interesting, and it took away a lot of the assumptions that players might have when you have to deal with a dragon, because it's no longer an entry in a book that is sort of like, you know, Steve Irwin running you down a guide to crocodiles, of you now have to ask which specific one are we dealing with, and you have to deal with them one-on-one as a person, and you have to sort of accept that you can't stereotype all of them, because that's a great way for your party to get eaten. But in addition to those things, I'm really pleased with how the Worm Mark came out. For folks who have not read either City of Worms, or you haven't seen any of my videos where I talked about dragons in Sundara, basically they are creatures of such extreme magical power that the older they get, the more powerful they become. They start imprinting themselves on the area around them if they spend time in a certain area for too long. This worm mark is usually how one realizes they have entered the territory of a powerful dragon. But in addition to leaving it just casually sort of like a radiation signature, dragons have the ability to imbue people with their worm mark in a way that they can mark people who have sworn themselves to their service. And if you want to play with that, if you want to have either dragons as patrons, or if you want to have characters who have sworn service to one worm or another, there are entire feat trees, or for Dungeons and Dragons, there's a background I believe I did for it, where you gain a worm mark and all of the privileges and problems that come with that service. And I thought that was really fun, and it's something I would kind of like to expand on in the future, just going forward, because I touched on them, I had a lot of fun with them, but there's always, you know, deeper to dig when it comes to dragons and what you want to do with them. Moving on to the third thing that I think makes this setting really unique, and that I had a lot of fun with, the more I reflect on it, the more I think about it, is I'm really pleased with what I did with elves. And elves have been getting a lot of hate over the past couple of years. Like, they were really popular when Lord of the Rings came out. Everybody wanted to play or be Legolas. But the coin has flipped over, and now elves are they're uncool. No one plays elves. Elves aren't fun. But because of the way we see elves and how popular they were, we also had that sort of Tolkien-ish view of them, of like, the elves are an elder race, the elves are dying, there's only so many of them, and they're losing more than they gain, and they are waning while other younger species are upcoming. And again, I kind of wanted to flip the script on that and ask, well, what if that wasn't the case? What if there was a big change that I did to how elves function? And the way that I messed with that is I made elves the most adaptable species in all of Sundara, both in a social sense or a metaphorical sense of elves will adapt to whatever challenges or environments they find themselves in, but it's also a very literal sense of elves have some of the biggest variety as far as the species go, because they will alter themselves to fit the environments that they're in. either using magic or using selective breeding, or in some cases just becoming one with where they happen to be living. Which is why you have elves in the deep underground, you have elves in the ancient forest, you have elves in the desert, you have elves everywhere, and while they are all still elves, they're all different and unique and adapted to their environments, which produces a lot of different cultures. It produces a huge variety within the species. But beyond that, the little caveat that I added was that elves have the ability to reproduce with basically any sentient creature. So half-elves are everywhere. Now, mechanically, you sort of have to pick which side you're getting benefits from, because you can't be half-elf, half something else, and stack all of the benefits. But thematically, story-wise, I wanted to change that whole thing of elves have difficulty conceiving, elves only have a handful of children, and I wanted it to be something that was, significantly different in that elves were fecund. Elves had the ability to repopulate the whole world if they wanted to. But they don't, because they are responsible members of their environment. They understand that if they overwhelm the ecosystem, it's going to cause problems. And it's that big picture, long view that keeps them sort of apart from others. It turns them into gardeners of the world, which I thought was really interesting, and I felt it was something folks might vibe with, especially if you're someone who saw that Sundara had an elf book, but you hadn't picked it up because elves weren't really your vibe anymore. I'd recommend giving it a look just because I tried to make them really different and really just reinvigorate them in a way that I don't see a lot of other places doing, and I thought folks might enjoy that, and if folks do, well, I might have to revisit elves and do some more stuff with them. And then, this one's just for me, really. You all can enjoy it too, but I did it mostly because I found it deeply amusing. But for the fourth thing on this list, of something I wanted to do with Sundara, because there is, of course, high magic all over the place. It's a very magic, very fantasy setting. But I also wanted to ask, well, what if certain technological discoveries occurred? How would they change in this world with all of these strange, resources they have, with all of the abilities that are currently present? What shape would these things take? How would they be different? And normally when folks hear the question of technology in a fantasy setting, they're thinking of magitech, they're thinking of far future stuff that is also affected by magic. Whereas what I was trying to do was to reach back into the past and look at previous situations we've had on Earth, who had, which we usually think of as primitive, but a lot of them had technologies that we have today. It's just we have a greater refinement of the concepts that they discovered. A good example is something I did in the town of Mauer's Crossing. They have an entire town where the streetlights are lit by natural gas. Everyone has natural gas piped into their houses. They cook with it. And people think of that usually as a very modern technology, but it's been around since the days of ancient China. People have been putting natural gas to work and piping it into places and using it for lighting and for cooking for thousands of years. And I felt that was a little mind-blowing when I first discovered that. It wasn't widespread, it was very regional. You had to be fairly close to where the thing was happening. But I asked myself, well, in a world full of alchemists and magic, couldn't they figure out a way to make that safer, to make it more accessible, to make it so an entire town could just have this luxury, this amenity? And so that was why I built the Mauer's Crossing the way I did. Another city that is really devoted to this idea is Silkgift, the city of sails. Silkgift was essentially me asking, well, how much engineering can we get away with, and how would this very mundane process change things going on in a setting that's this powerfully magical? And this is where we get things like very humble inventions that, we have had since early in our civilization. One of them is the wind-driven screw pump. And a screw pump, for folks who haven't seen it, it's a screw inside a very tight casing. So as the screw turns, it pulls water up from whatever body of water it's been put in, and the screw eventually deposits it up in a reservoir. Now, if you just have a couple of these stuck into the bay, and they pump water up into a higher reservoir, you can then take that water and you can use the weight and the potential energy of it to drive other machinery. whether it's a trip hammer that you're using for forging, whether it's a loom or a similar cloth weaving machine. It's something that brings what should be a, we'll say, quote-unquote medieval sort of setting up to a Victorian level of power, using simple discoveries, things that already exist that would not be difficult to create, and using technologies that we've had since at least the times of ancient Greece, and just applying them in a different way using a different set of mechanics. And that is something I really wanted to just play with a little bit, because so often we assume that in fantasy settings, everything is dirty, everything is gross, everything is ignorant, when in reality, like, that's a very small period of our actual history that we're using as inspiration. And there are so many other periods where things were not like that, where things were vibrant, things were colorful, where people had access to all kinds of just amenities. They had access to all kinds of technologies that, while they may not have been astonishingly advanced for the time, they were common. It was a thing that, you could go into any city and there wouldn't just be a well dug into the ground that you had to hope for. They had aqueducts running all throughout ancient Rome that brought water everywhere. They had all sorts of things that were just on par with what we have today in a lot of ways, and in some ways they're even better because we still use them. There was not controversy, but the interesting historical discovery of ancient Rome's concrete. We could never figure out how they made it, and it was because you had to use seawater. The salt was an important component of it. Once we figured that out, we realized that, this empire, thousands of years in the dust, had something that was at least as good as we have today. And that is something I wanted to really add to Sundara. I wanted to make it clear that, like, yes, there is magic and sorcery and monsters and strange creatures all over the place, but there are also engineers, civil works, there are people who are making discoveries, who are trying to just make life better in a mundane fashion. And I felt that was important to point out, because so many times we think it's either you have to have functioning science, functioning engineering, or you can have magic and monsters. There's no reason you can't have both. And Sundara is very much a setting where my attitude towards it is, but why can't we do both? Why can't we have all of these things? And I think that's something that folks would really appreciate, just sitting down in, and instead of trying to be more exclusionary and trying to say no to so many things, asking, yeah, what if we did have that? What if we had this and this other thing? Would one become more popular? Would one influence the other? How would it change the world? Those are the questions that I want to ask, and that I want folks who run games in this setting or who play in this setting to ask. And lastly, this is not so much a thing that I'm proud that I've done, but something that I'm reminding myself of for the future, is that despite the rather large word count that I've done for this setting, for the 20 some odd books that have come out, 30 some odd if you count the ones that my contributors have put out, there's still so much undiscovered country in Sundara. There is so much space that just hasn't been filled in yet. There are so many things I haven't gotten to and so many things I haven't designed yet. And that can seem really overwhelming. There's just so much to fill in. And I wanted to take a moment and remind myself that I don't have to fill it all in at once, but I also need to remind myself of that potential as part of what excited me to make this setting in the first place. In a lot of ways, it's what I'm hoping makes folks who want to check it out, who want to run games in it, also excited. Because there could be anything in that space. There could be ruins of long-lost civilizations. There could be an ancient dragon who's been meticulously categorizing and cataloging everything it comes across, giving huge insight into what's been going on in a region over centuries. There could be elven enclaves, like down toward the center of the earth, who've discovered an entire hollow earth within this setting. There could be just fun new cities that I haven't written up anything for. Speaking of, I'm currently contemplating a city in the far north, built in an ancient caldera that's full of technologically advanced minotaurs, as well as a city of ruins that is one part Las Vegas and one part a training ground for assassins. So if you have an opinion as to which of those you'd like to see next, put it in the comments down below, and I will tally them up and see which one gets more attention in the new year. But there is still so much to do, so much to play with, so much to expand on, that I'm not out of ideas. I'm not out of space. I'm not having to cram stuff in to figure out some way to make it work within the framework that I've developed. And because of that, it's sometimes hard to get back to it because it can feel overwhelming, especially when it feels a lot of the time like it's just me and a handful of people along on this journey. So if you are someone who has enjoyed Sundara thus far, whether it's just hearing me tell you about the lore, or if you've actually picked up some of the books and given it a look, let me know that in the comments down below. Let me know that you're coming with me on this journey, even if this is your first video and just by the end of this you think, that sounds really interesting, I should really check some of this out. If it's a thing you all want more of, I am happy to deliver it, whether you want short stories, whether you want audio dramas, whether you want some more guides to the setting, or if I really want to bite the bullet, if you want me to write an adventure or two for it, I could probably find some way to make that happen in the new year. But as with all things, I need your opinion. I need you to let me know what it is you want, because if you're not leaving comments, if you're not telling me, I basically have to spread out the sales numbers, and I have to try and use them as a crystal ball to figure out what it is the public wants and what is going to make all of you happy as far as, being gamers who enjoy this setting are. So if you have specific opinions, please, please, please put them down below. Let me know what they are, because just telling me what you want makes my life so much easier, and you are way more likely to get what you want without me guessing. But that's all for this video. I hope everyone enjoyed it. I hope you stick around for what comes for Sundara in the new year, and that you check out some of the stuff that's come out before now. And let me know what you enjoyed most. As always, like, share, subscribe, all those things. And until next time, Happy New Year and happy gaming, everybody.